All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out. We'll try to get you home in time for the WVU game today. Good to see everyone back here for our first installment of our second Saturday lecture series after our summer break. I know Andy did a lot of traveling this summer. Anybody think any battlefields? Anywhere? I think I made it to Harper's Ferry, Gettysburg, Antietam, Montgomery, Spotsylvania, Manassas. A few made it to a few. Just have a few announcements today before we get started with our speaker. We had a lot of first-time visitors this morning in the SP Post. If anyone hasn't visited the SP Post, it's located right over my right shoulder here, right outside the door. The SP Post is open at 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. every Saturday for guided tours with our docents. So please check it out after the program today if you haven't been there already. Our speaker was kind enough to draw a few names here for our raffle. So the winners of our raffle today: Dean Thomas, Jim Mayfield, G. Melton, Pauline McGrath. Grab your books back there. Thank you for your support. I did want to share that our annual benefit is next Friday evening, September 20th. Hi-Fi, an evening of mid-century sound, will feature the sounds and styles of the 1950s and 60s. Think Mad Men. The evening includes a cocktail hour in the library, a concert in the music hall, and an after party right here in the Lincoln Gallery, as well as downstairs in the studio. Tickets are available on our website. Our executive director, Marley Gallagher, is here. I'm sure she would be happy to tell you about that and happy to sell you a ticket. So I do hope to see some of you there. Please note that next month, our lecture series for October is going to fall on the third Saturday of October. That is October 19th. Please don't come on the second Saturday. There won't be anybody here. But our speaker for October is Pennsylvania historian Eric Money. He will be here to discuss the Pennsylvania Reserves and Civil War. That is a passion project of his. Eric is a veteran himself. He's a talented leather worker, and he was formerly the producer of the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. And Matt Callery here a few weeks ago, Eric worked with him for a number of years. Really knows his stuff. That should be a good talk on October 19th. Closing out our 2024 lecture series will be Dr. Elena Roberts from the University of Pittsburgh. She will be here discussing her book, I've Been Here All the While, Black Freedom on Native Land. This discusses Reconstruction in Indian territory following the Civil War, the promise of 40 acres and a mule. I worked over the summer to pull together our slate of speakers for 2025 for our lecture series. I'll run through this very quickly, but the list will be updated on our website within the next few days. You can start thinking about some of our talks for next year. In January, we'll have Matthew Hankinson of the Armstrong County Civil War Roundtable. His talk will be Blood, Courage, and the Maltese Cross, Personal Stories of the 62nd Pennsylvania. Of course, many of the veterans of the SP Post and Captain SP himself belong to the 62nd Pennsylvania. So that should be an interesting and relevant talk here for the SP Post. In February, we'll have Rachel Nicholas. Rachel is a graduate student of West Virginia University. She served as a seasonal park ranger at Gettysburg for many years until just about 2 months ago. She was hired as the new historian at Gettysburg National Military Park. She will be here to discuss Gettysburg's Black community during the Civil War, their experiences during the Gettysburg campaign. That's one of her passion projects as well. In March, we will have Ohio historian Dan Masters. He will be here to discuss Pennsylvania at the Battle of Stones River. Dan is the author of many books. He's got a bunch of them out, but his latest book, published by Savas Beatty, Held by the Acre, A Narrative History of the Stones River Campaign, should be out here later this year. He does plan to have copies of that new book for sale. There were just a couple of Pennsylvania regiments, I believe, that were at Stones River, and we'll be discussing that. Next April, of course, is our symposium. I'll get to that in just a moment. In May, we have Dr. Etta Fields Black of Carnegie Mellon University. She will be here to discuss her most recent book that just came out in the past year, Combie, Harriet Tubman, the Combahee River Raid, and Black Freedom During the Civil War. In June, we'll welcome back Dr. Matt Lively from Morgantown. Matt has presented here several times over the years, but he is finishing a new book on some of the more famous medical curiosities of the Battle of Gettysburg. So we'll be here to discuss some of that, like the shot that killed John Reynolds, the shot that killed Jenny Wade, some more interesting kind of medical curiosities. The book will be done by then. I'm not sure that it will be back from the publisher in time for that, so you'll be some of the first to hear about his new research. We'll take our summer break again next July and August. We'll meet back here in September for Matt Borders for his talk on Western Pennsylvania and the Antietam campaign. Matt was supposed to be our speaker here today. He had a work commitment come up that could not be moved, so he is going to promise to come back here next September. So we just moved him back here. Next October, we have Jonathan Noyalis from Shenandoah University and the McCormick Civil War Institute. Jonathan is still deciding on the topic, whatever he decides on. It's going to be great. Jonathan is one of my very, very favorite Civil War historians, my very favorite human beings. Really looking forward to welcoming him here. He's never been here, and he's excited to come. Then closing out 2025, we will have William Vaudrey coming in to speak about the Trent Affair between the United States and Great Britain in November 1861. William is a judge in Cuyahoga County. He is a law professor at New Orleans College, so he should have some great insight into the legal and political aspects of the Trent Affair. I'm really happy with this slate of speakers I've been able to put together. It's becoming increasingly less difficult finding speakers that want to come here on any given month because word has gotten out about this program, about the great community of people that come out here every month to see these speakers. Keep coming out, keep coming here, we'll keep bringing in all of these great historians. Now, I promised earlier in the summer that we'd officially announce our symposium and open ticket sales here at our September meeting. At each of the past symposia, I've asked the attendees to fill out a survey afterwards, let us know how we did, if there's anything we can do better, if there's anything we want to see at a future symposium, and that's what I use to build the symposium for the next year. So I had about 25% of attendees fill out the survey. I think it's pretty good. And a few things, as I was reading these quickly, jumped out. One, that people wanted more room. We've sold out the past 3 years in the studio. We have really been packed in there elbow to elbow. So I can appreciate wanting some more elbow room. Another was that people wanted the symposium to focus on Antietam and the Maryland campaign. And the third that jumped out was that people wanted me to bring Scott Hartwig here to speak. I don't want to mind anymore, but I was able to deliver on all three. I think really good. So our 2025 symposium, our battle flags were tattered. The Maryland campaign will be held April 11th and 12th here at the Andrew Carnegie Free Library and Music Hall. Our symposium is sponsored by Civil War Trails this year. We'd like to thank them so much for their support. We'll be holding the symposium this year in the Music Hall rather than the studio. So much more room to spread out, nice comfortable seats. We'll open the symposium on Friday evening, April 11th. We'll have some refreshments. We'll have a cash bar. We'll also have Arsenal Cider. Has anyone been to Arsenal Cider here? That's our local Civil War themed hard cider distillery. They will be here for bottle sales and tastings. Really great stuff. Perfect complement to the symposium. Opening the symposium on Friday will be one of our hometown favorite speakers, Harry Smeltzer. He will discuss some of his recent research he's been doing on Albert Magilton and the Pennsylvania Reserves at Antietam. That evening, we will have a live podcast recording of the hit podcast Antietam and Beyond with John Banks and Tom McMillan. Still figuring out exactly what that's going to look like. We're going to try to make it more interactive, make it fun. They'll do some interviews with some of our speakers throughout the weekend there. If you haven't listened to the Antietam and Beyond podcast, you can find it on any of your favorite podcast platforms, or you can look up their website or Google, but I highly recommend you check it out. They have a lot of fun. They do a great job. That should be a really fun evening. We'll be back here on Saturday morning for our usual full day of programming and lectures. That morning, we'll welcome Dennis Fry. Dennis is the retired chief historian of Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. He'll be here to talk about Lee's Albatross, Harpers Ferry during Maryland campaign. So the Harpers Ferry garrison there that held out and kind of held up Robert E. Lee's plans. We'll talk about all of that. Dennis is one of my all-time favorite historians. He's kind enough to write the foreword for my book. Really excited to bring him here. Following Dennis will be John Hopkack, Park Ranger, Gettysburg National Military Park. John's talk will be, this has been a glorious victory, the Battle of South Mountain, an overview. Battle of South Mountain. Today is, of course, the anniversary of the Battle of South Mountain. John has a few books out on the battle. He has several other books. His battle walks, his programs that he does at Gettysburg are some of the most very popular that they offer. So I was really happy when he told me he would come out here for the symposium. After lunch, we'll have a lecture from Scott Hartwig. Scott is the retired chief of interpretation at Gettysburg National Military Park. He is the author of the magisterial 2-volume study on the Maryland campaign that volume 2 just came out a few years ago. The first volume several years prior. One of the definitive, authoritative historians on the Maryland campaign. It's a really big deal to bring him out here for this. I was so flattered when he said he would come, so I really hope people will come out and support that. One of the great, public interpretive historians out there today. Really impressive that he's coming here. He'll be speaking on Antietam, the soldier's experience. He'll be using post-war letters and accounts from veterans who were there at the battle. Like I mentioned, the majority of the surveys said they wanted to see Scott Hartwig here, so I'm happy to be able to deliver. Following Scott will be a lecture from Ashley Whitehead-Lusky. Ashley is the assistant director of the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. She's an incredible historian. I know we have some regulars that have attended some Civil War Institutes in the past. Their summer program. Ashley's name has come up before. Previous years, someone people wanted to see come out here and speak, so we're bringing her in. Her talk will be Nothing Could Be Half So Melancholy as a Battle Won, Sharpsburg civilians and the aftermath of Antietam, how they coped with the disease and the destruction of the landscape, how they coped with the early relic hunters and people coming in to exploit the battlefield and the civilians there. Closing out the day on Saturday will be my great friend, my co-author, Kevin Pollock. Kevin is a historian of Prince William County Historic Preservation. He is site manager at Bristow Station Battlefield and Ben Lindman Historic Site. He's also a board member of the Antietam Institute. He is a licensed battlefield guide at Antietam. He will be speaking on the Loudoun Valley campaign of 1862. This was October and November, immediately following Antietam cavalry battles that happened in the Loudoun Valley, the unofficial close of the Maryland campaign. After the symposium, we can all retreat down to the courthouse. Someone could buy me a beer. I wouldn't need it at that point. But it's going to be a really great weekend. We'll have our usual raffles. We'll have book sales. Several of our speakers will have their books here for sale. I've already heard from other historians like Alex Rossino. He has a bunch of books out through Saps Baby. He plans to be here at the symposium. He'll be selling books. So we'll have other historians here that aren't speaking will be selling books as well. It's going to be another great weekend. Civil War history. Ticket sales officially opened about half an hour ago. I saw we already have one sold there somehow. Tickets are $85. That includes the program on Friday and Saturday, as well as refreshments. Friday evening, a light breakfast on Saturday, a boxed lunch, drinks, and snacks. You're getting an extra day. It's only $20 more than last year. So I hope all of you come out and support the symposium, the SB post. I'm so looking forward to April. As you know, all the proceeds from the symposium support our Civil War programming here and support the SB post. So if you keep coming out for these, we'll be able to keep putting them on. I'd like to thank Marley Gallagher for allowing me to run with this symposium again, allowing it to continue to grow year after year. She kind of gave me free reign here, and so let's make this work, everyone. Excited for it. But back to today. Sorry, that was a lot of announcements. Today we welcome Robert Hilliard, an award-winning author. Rob Hilliard has written on sports history and the outdoors for over 3 decades. Rob wrote for the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review and other outlets such as Pennsylvania Wildlife and Pittsburgh History Magazine. After contributing to a Beaver County history anthology entitled Rivers of Destiny, Rob wrote his first book, A Season on the Allegheny, focusing on Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. Rob's first novel, the historical espionage thriller In Freedom's Shadow, was published last November. He does have copies here for sale. We also do have one copy in our collection downstairs. In Freedom's Shadow won a 2024 International Fireword Book Award for African American fiction and a spring 2024 Pencraft Book Award for historical fiction. Rob was originally on the calendar for next September, 1 year from this weekend. But when Matt Borders had to take a rain check, Rob graciously agreed to move up a full calendar year to speak with us. He's been super flexible. He has been like the most responsive historian that I have worked with here, which I really appreciate. Immediately gets back to me. He's made this easy to switch here. So his talk today is Spies, Slaves, and Secrets of the Civil War. So, ladies and gentlemen, Rob Hilliard.
Everybody be okay? No. So, thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for John Eric Dolly for the introduction, but for inviting me to speak here today. And I appreciate everybody coming out and bringing the backyard for all traffic to get here. Frankly, I'm honored and I'm humbled to have been invited, and I feel like I need to clarify at least one point right up front. I'm sure you're all familiar with the very scholarly and distinguished list of historians who have spoken here and will be speaking here in the coming year. And just so we're 100% clear on this, I'm not one. I am a storyteller. I've certainly done a lot of historical research, but I'm kind of climbing on the backs of those folks who've done the real nitty-gritty research. As I said, I'm a storyteller, and I'm the worst kind of storyteller because I'm a novelist, which means I'm probably the biggest liar you're going to talk to today. So, but that said, next 45 to 50 minutes here, we'll try and stick mostly to the truth. And we'll talk a little bit about espionage during the Civil War. So, we're here with this. So just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll talk a little bit about why there were so many spies in place during the Civil War. What the capabilities were of each side in terms of espionage and how that changed over the course of the war. We'll talk some really super cool Civil War spy tech, some serious James Bond stuff from 1863. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of go through a little who's who, maybe it's a rogues gallery, I'm not sure, of who those spies were, who the spy masters, who were some of the agents on the ground from both sides. And particularly, we'll highlight the role of the African-American, both enslaved and free enslaved people serving as agents as we know. But beginning, why were there so many spies active during the Civil War? So I'm going to kind of fast forward about 1 million years to start. We're going to talk about a completely different war. It's one I'm sure that most of you are familiar with. I see that there's a couple of people here that have the same color hair as mine, so you were around during the Cold War. But I like to make the comparison of starting with the fact that the Cold War was essentially, if we set aside Vietnam and Korea as outside events or set up of the Cold War, it was essentially not a shooting war, but mostly a war of espionage. It was both sides spying on each other, or two sides, but each side spying on each other. And at the outset, I should mention, there were so many spies during the war that it saw the formation of the CIA, KGB, East Germany's secret police, Stasi. All of those were caused by outgrowths from or came into being during the Cold War. So that's kind of bears out the fact that it was very much a war of espionage. the reason, or one of the reasons that it started out that way, really had to do with geography. That's what I want to start with here. So at the end of World War II, you had the Soviet armies, who were, of course, everyone was allegedly allies here, but you had the Soviets coming from the east and moving into Germany. You had the mostly American, some British forces coming from the west as they were crushing Nazi Germany and coming together. After the end of the war, when the Soviets basically announced that they were closing off the border between what then became known as East and West Germany, you had this immediate immobility across the line. And effectively that trapped people on either side of the Iron Curtain. Whatever side you were on the day they closed the border, that was the side you were stuck on. And what happened was you have one nation one day, and then almost literally the very next day, it was separated into two. And you had this very long, adjacent, guarded by armed guards border that didn't allow people to come back and forth across it. And what also happened as a result of that was you had people here in West Germany who had sympathies with the communist government of the Soviets in East Germany. And equally, you had people caught on the other side of the curtain over here who had more democratic notions and loyalties, but they were stuck on what was for them the wrong side of the curtain. And that some of those people, of course, we well know over the decades, some of those people were able to escape and make it over to the other side. Others just lived and sort of suffered through whichever side they happened to be on. But there's a third group there who became spies. And the reason they did it was, as I said, their loyalties lay, literally on the other side of the line. So they would be over here gathering information and feeding it back to the Soviet government on this side, or they lived on the communist side. They would gather information and covertly feed it back to the West. So that was, I mean, that's grossly oversimplifying 40 years of Cold War geopolitics, but that was a major reason why there were so many spies in place during the Cold War. So if we spin back about 90 years, and you think about the Civil War in the same context, it was a very similar setup. You had people living, of course, throughout the United States at the outset of the war. And then when secession happened, and then particularly in April of 1861, when Fort Sumter was fired on, you had this immediate overnight split, and you had one nation becoming two. Not only becoming two nations, but two nations that were aggressors against each other. So again, immediately you had this long, extended, guarded by armed guards, armed soldiers, border that basically locked down travel back and forth between here. And just as I talked about in Germany, in the Cold War, you had people who had sympathies with whatever side they happened to be on. The day that border crossing was no longer allowed to move back and forth, their sympathies might have been with the other side. So you had very fervent secessionists who lived in the north, particularly in some of the border states here in California, but in other areas as well. And they were, from their standpoint, stuck in the north. And then you had equally fervent abolitionists, for instance, who lived in the south, and they were stuck there. So again, a major number of population of those people decided to not just lay down and take that, but to actively try and serve the side that they had loyalty to by gathering intelligence and supplying it across the lines to the other side. So if we kind of zoom in from the sort of country level down to just the capital level here, in Germany, we have Berlin, famously, or infamously perhaps, separated by the Berlin Wall. And again, you just have one city divided into two. And I won't repeat the whole everything I went through on the previous slide, but it's very much the same scenario. You walk from the back and forth across it, people on each side, spies on the other side. So much though that during the Cold War, Berlin became known as the city of spies. There were so many people working for the other team, as it were, that it was internationally known as the city of Spies. So if you carry that, this is just a zoomed-in version. If you carry that back again to the Civil War, in I think it was June of 1861, when Confederate capital was moved from Alabama to Richmond, and so you had now two warring capitals, Richmond here and Washington D.C. here. It wasn't one city split into two, but they're only right around 100 miles apart. So in that era, that's like a 2-day ride on horseback, maybe a little bit less than that if you were coming up river and boat. And so relatively easy passage back and forth, quick passage back and forth. And as they found out over the course of the war, that proximity between the two capitals allowed a lot of flow of clandestine information back and forth between the two sides. Surprisingly, one thing I like to point out, talking about Western Pennsylvania, is really it was about 100 miles distance and two river crossings separating Washington D.C. and Richmond. For us, for the Yinzers here, we don't like to cross rivers. That would be a big deal, for Pittsburghers, but apparently for people in Virginia, they were able to somehow make that cross river. No tunnels in between there, so that happened. But so there was not an open flow by any means, but a lot of flow of information, more than the government wanted, back and forth between the spies and each side. So the next section I'm going to go to here is talking about some information from two monographs that are from the CIA website. Disclaimer: if you leave the building and you see somebody in a trench coat and a hat pulled down over their eyes hanging around outside, or if you're talking on your phone and you hear clicking or something in the background, that's not what I have to do with that. You're on your own. I downloaded it. So this first set of information is from this monograph called Intelligence in the Civil War. And what I want to know, it's a long and, if you're interested, really useful article, essay. But what I want to focus on here is what were the capacities of each side when it came to spying at the outset of the war, and how did that change as time went on? So in 1861, from the Union side, there really was no intelligence agency or network at the outset of the war. And that's maybe a little bit surprising because, of course, that was the establishment of the federal side. But it had been right around 15 years since they had been engaged in a foreign war in America. And at that time, and really continuing in the 20th century, the U.S. was very much an isolationist country. And so they felt like they were just going to keep things to themselves, and really no reason to have this, or at least to centralize it. Now, that's not to say that they weren't gathering foreign intelligence, but at that time, that was done in a less organized fashion through State Department, through ambassadors, and also through the Navy, through naval attaches. But again, not a single organized network. They did eventually, over the course of the war, establish what became known as the Bureau of Military Information that did gather intelligence to serve the war. Interestingly, though, and I wish I knew more about this as a word, I'm not a historian, I wish I understood more about the reason for this. But the federal side never centralized their intelligence gathering. And by that I mean there was no one agency where all the information from all spy networks came to it. And then it would go to like the head of military intelligence, or they would be the American CIA, something like that. And then it's the president. Instead, there were various spy masters, sometimes working at the same time in isolation from each other and reporting to different people. So as an example, I'll touch on this later, but Edwin Stanton was receiving information from one person, and Lincoln was getting that information. General McClellan was getting information from totally different, totally separate, and sometimes totally conflicting sources of intelligence gathering coming in. And as you might expect, that created a lot of confusion throughout the length of the war. Because somebody saying, well, it's this, and somebody else saying, well, it is this. And that was really an ongoing situation that they did not remedy. On the Confederate side, of course, they had no intelligence gathering, so in the country, so it was very from scratch. They did eventually, as part of their signal corps, establish their secret service, and they were a little bit better at the sneaky stuff than the Federalists were. They were more organized with their intelligence gathering, and over the longer haul, at least taken maybe as a subset, just the espionage piece alone, they were probably more effective in terms of some of the outcomes that they were able to implement. And particularly, I'm over here at the bottom. This is where we're going to get to the armies of participation in here for a second. So you guys can get your minds going. I'll give you a second. They ran espionage operations in the north, and particularly later in the war out of Canada. So, trivia question: anybody know the farthest north battle in the Civil War?
Vermont.
It is Vermont, St. Albans. That's correct. Thank you. I was worried for a second there. I was really stranded. And that was run by the Confederate Secret Service. They were based in Toronto, but they came out of Canada down into Vermont. That's why it was in Vermont. If anybody's familiar with Northwest Conspiracy, it's not like a year after St. Albans, if I remember right. Let's see, 1864. Also one of the same Confederate Secret Service out of Canada attempted to come down into Chicago, Ohio, and free Confederate. So one of the interesting comments from the monograph here was that they said that each side still used age-old intelligence techniques, code breaking, discussions, covert surveillance. But in the Civil War, as at that time the most modern wars, there were two new innovations that took hold during that time that then lasted for decades, really even into today. And those were wiretapping and overhead reconnaissance. So I'm taking the second one first there. People think about overhead reconnaissance in 1861 or 1865. You're still 50 plus years from airplanes. They certainly weren't flying drones or anything like we would today. So what are they talking about there? And the answer is it was lighter than an air. And they were using spy balloons. So this is I kind of like this depiction for a couple of reasons, but to give you the quick background, both sides had spy balloons. Mostly the federal side used them more, and that was under the direction of Commander Thaddeus Lowe, and they were active from the beginning of the war up until his resignation in summer of 1863. But what they would do is they would float the balloon up. This is not shown here, but it was tethered to the ground on a long rope with multiple handlers who laid the rope out, and then he would look out across the battlefield. As you can kind of see here, he's got field glasses or telescope, and from there you can see the topography on the other side. You can see where troops were placed, where artillery was placed, and then once he had observed as much as he could, he would give a signal to the ground, and the handlers would haul the rope, pull them back down, and report what we can see from the other side of the mountain. That was super high tech for that era. That was the drone of its day. And that was the plus side. The negative side, though, if there was wind, if there was rain, if there was lightning, bullets are extraordinarily hard to handle. I mean, that's a machine if you can even go. And then just the logistics, getting the balloons to and from the battlefield and load it all up, put it in the balloon's car. Don't damage the balloon, by the way, because it won't hold hot air. And just getting it in and out, ultimately those were two of the three major failings of the balloon network system. The third major failing is actually depicted right here. They make great targets. Yeah, and I was given this presentation a while back, and afterwards, somebody came up to me and he had been in the service, and he said, I was in the service. Somebody had a really other side. That's the only thing I would have shot. Like, that would be fantastic to say you punched holes in the board. Over the course of the war, as the artillery, but also rifles got better and more accurate, that distance that they can reach out and punch holes in those buildings got greater and greater. So the effectiveness got less and less. So the balloons kind of faded from view, although it did establish the idea that you could go in the area and see what was happening on the other side of the house, which is critical even. The other technology that took hold and was extremely was the telephone. It was invented about 20 years before the outbreak of the war. This was really the first time that the telegraph was used in any major way in a battlefield environment. Part of it is, like I said, it was relatively recently invented, but also because the U.S. led the way in it. So there were thousands of miles of existing telegraph lines before the outbreak. During there were thousands more miles of line built. Many of those were temporary. I've seen estimates as many as 10,000 miles temporary and permanent telegraph lines just in the area, just in the theaters of battle of the Civil War, in that 4-year span. And so the way that worked, again, is depicted pretty well here on the right. You had a rider come in from the very front, and they would come in, report to the generals here who would be the headquarters, somewhat remote in the battlefield, but typically not too far away. Whether this one happens to be granted, but they would report to them what was going on. They would in turn give them orders to take back to the front, but they would transcribe that information and get it to the telegraph operator here, and he would tap out a message that in minutes would be in Washington, D.C. So it's the first time in history that you had a commander-in-chief who could get battlefront information within a few minutes of what was happening from hundreds of miles away, even thousands of miles, if you find out what you're from. And it was game breaking, it was ground changing, and then you probably read about our gallery majors in Lincoln during the battle would spend all day in the telegraph office, just their telegraph office, just waiting for telegrams to come in and get that information. So he was, like a lot of us are scrolling our phones today, he was addicted to that almost just-in-time information. So this is, I said this was the drone of its era. I like to say this is the cell phone of its era. This was actually a mobile telegraph unit, and you can see the operator sitting inside here. Of course, they would take it out near the front. This guy in here tap away on the key, and then you see a temporary line coming out here. That would go to another temporary line, which would go off until it ultimately hit the permanent. So they were sending this information back and forth, and all those thousands of miles of line that I mentioned. When you're in war, one side's trying to do bad things to the other side. Pretty quickly to figure out, you know what, if there's information going across that line, I could probably tap into it. And that's exactly what they started doing. So they would actually send people up on the pole. You would literally take the insulation off the wire, put it in the wire, and then hear the dots and dashes of the Morse code come through. They would intercept that message. So that's the spy piece, or the spy pieces. When you know that someone is listening in on your messages, you want to keep them secret, what do? What would you do? So you start using the code system. So this is an actual snippet of a substitution code that was used by Spy Chief Alan Pinkerton for the federal side. We'll talk much more about him later. But this is actually from a handwritten letter that I believe he sent to Lincoln. And they used a simple substitution code, so, take the words from the left here, which is what they wanted to report, and they would replace them with the words on the right. So the example that I use is they wanted to say that there were cavalry troops drilling in a certain area. They might say something like, lambs or hand lamb in the center. And what they're saying is there are military horse troops drilling in that example center. Now, if you're just getting they wouldn't use center at all. Actually, they had for some of the major applications, they had substitution. But what they would do is if you intercepted that, right? They're talking about the damage to oil. Fingertip agents, there were it was about 170 words in the substitution code. So, which means double that, right? Because you get another word in the replacement word. They had to memorize all of it because you couldn't be caught with walking around with this piece of paper in your pocket, right? You'd be in the road pretty quick. So they memorized all these codes, and when you were sending telegrams, they knew all those substitution words in their head. And they would, that's how they would form the messages back to Washington. The letter of the right, the Confederates at the time were using a little bit more complex system. They were using what's called a cipher, which is just another form of code, but they were using single letter substitutions. So in this one, and I'll get to the author of this letter in a minute as well, but you can see there were she was using symbols and numbers and some letter substitutions for each individual letter. Same concept here, but instead of replacing the whole word, you're doing it. And the good part of this is the fourth generation, what I described earlier, single word substitution. But that side is you gotta have something to decipher it. What these numbers and letters mean. You have to have a key to tell you what that cipher means. So what they came up with was a cipher disk. And this is a picture taken from an actual cipher disk from Civil War Museum in Richmond. I put this word in research in the book. And I was beside myself because it was already mentioned in the book. And when we walked through the museum, my wife will tell you, I was like, oh my God, I just this is the greatest thing ever. So, but what you would do is you spin the inside or outside of each other. So you would, these are aligned, the others are aligned with each other. But what you would do is you would turn it. So maybe the B is aligned with the S, let's just say. And you would then use the outside to represent your, whatever you want to send in your real message. And then if you run the E with the S, that would realign all the letters around the dial. And then you would just replace them with the new letter on the inside. So I actually have a replication of two things here. This one, I'm not going to give it around, it was given to me as a gift by a gentleman, some of you may recognize the name Donald Harper. He was an NSA officer, and then after he retired, became a Civil War researcher for Civil War, Civil War espionage. He's passed away. A friend of his gave me that. We'll hand this one out. This is the version of the same thing. He passed it around to look at it. Just spitting out his office. So who were all these spies that I've been talking about? Who were the individuals? One will go, as always, ladies first. This woman is Elizabeth Bailey. She was a member of Richmond High Society. She was also very much an abolitionist. Didn't believe in slavery. She freed all her slaves before the outset. But then, because that wasn't sort of widely broadcast, we didn't do that in society in that era. I continued to work with her. And then during the war, even later in the war, the last 2.5 years, she formed a network of spies where she was actually getting information out to General Grant and to Washington, to what he did in Stanford, using her servants to gather information throughout the city. One of those was Mary Rose, and she worked in the Confederate White House. Van Lew was able to use her position in the society to get Mary placed as a servant in the Confederate White House. So she was acting like she couldn't read or write. She actually had a committee. She got Philadelphia on steel. And so she was literally looking at plans, letters, maps that were laying on Jefferson Davis's desk, memorizing the information, coming back, and then again, coding that information and sneaking out of Richmond to get to them. You may or may not recognize those two names. Probably will sometime soon though, because there is a miniseries being developed about them. It's called The Greyhounds by Morgan Freeman and Cochran. And it's supposed to be coming out sometime soon. So, like I said, if you haven't heard about it already, this is Pauline Cushman. She was also a spy from the federal side. She was an actress prior to the war. And then during the Civil War, she toured theaters throughout the South and basically used her mobility in the interaction that she had with kind of that upper crust of society and also Confederate officers to gather snippets of information and then pass them back to her contacts to get back to the Union side. So that was a case where, again, her mobility allowed to do things that other people might not suspect. This is Bellboy. I somewhat hesitate to do this, but I can't let it do that. She was, first of all, she was appropriate to the backyard brawl today, I guess. She was from Western Virginia, which is now West Virginia. But she was a Confederate sympathizer. And according to her, did some spying and provided information to Stonewall Jackson early in the war. Now, she was one of the people who talked more about spying than actually accomplished things on the espionage front. But she was also became known as the Cleopatra of the secession, Cleopatra of the Confederacy. Maybe it's just the photography of the era. I'm not sure, but like, I don't look at that picture, it doesn't scream Cleopatra to me. So, like I said, I kind of have to take on her too long and I kind of shouldn't take shots, but I'm not sure how she. Someone else who was actually a much more successful spy, and she was the author of the letter that they had in cipher up there a year ago, was Rose Greenhow. She was, again, a Confederate sympathizer, lived in Washington, D.C. prior to the outbreak of the war. And Rose had, if you've seen the movie Animal House, she had a certain morally casual attitude, shall we say. And so she was willing to go in the wild to gather, I'm tap dancing around here, but to gather information from men who were in the service of the federal army. There were a couple of federal army officers and at least one U.S. senator who regretted their interactions. She was getting information from them, feeding it in those cipher letters like I showed you before, directly to the South. However, she was captured during the war, early in the war, by Alan Pinkerton and his team of spies, counteragents, effectively, and went to prison in Washington, D.C., but she still, even while she was there, she was still sending out letters to the South. She found a way to continue, including through her father. And then hopefully everybody in this area, Tom, if you know, I'm sure probably soon you'll be reporting on bill, so you can see more of her. We did have multiple sections on her, but from an espionage standpoint, she used the Underground Railroad network that she built before the war to get slaves out, which she worked as a conductor. She used that same network during to gather intelligence and feed it back to the Union. On the men's side, we have George Clark. He was probably the most effective spy chief during the Civil War on the federal side, really from the other side. He didn't really move into that position until 1863. Really, Gettysburg was kind of his first major involved on the side. He was very effective there. Continued to be very effective for the last 2 years of the war in the Eastern Front. And Robert Baker, he started reporting with Scott at the very outset of the war. When Scott retired, Baker continued to work feeding information to Edward Stanley. Baker was not, he was like that where he talked a good game. It's really not 100% sure whether he was actually effective as a spy. And kind of in category, probably most well known for him and his team pursuing Booth after the assassination. And if you hear him tell it, he was solely responsible for Booth's capture. You hear other people tell it, they mostly got away and slowed down the process. So we'll leave that to the decisions against it. This gentleman's name is Frank Stringfellow. He was a Confederate spy. You kind of see from the photo here, very slow. So much so, from the outset of the war, he volunteered to be a soldier. They wouldn't take it. It was too small, and they were able to serve. So as the war went on, of course, the Confederate line became more depleted. They started taking more people, so they finally allowed him in, but they were still concerned they couldn't be all carry a rifle or a rucksack. So they made him a spy, and he was so slight that on at least one spy mission, he posed as a woman. And used that to be able to go across into the war. So I'm very excited to see this picture. And this is hopefully and here it's Lincoln. So with him here, this is John Fleur on the right, and this is Alan Pinkerton. Now, most people know Pinkerton from the detective agency, which is still in existence today. But at the outset of the war, I mentioned before, there was no spot. Intelligence. So that's when it was George McClellan who recognized that need, and just as they would today. He said, you know, I'm going to go. But this guy team has a detective agency. They're not hiring him to come in and be your spy. And that's exactly what they did. So he Pinkerton agency was based in Chicago. They basically picked out all their agents, operatives. That was Pinkerton for the organization. I wish that very much used that. Picked them up lock, stock, and barrel. Brought them to Washington, D.C. and set up operations there. So Pinkerton was, as I like to say, fantastic, groundbreaking detective. Kind of a middling spy because he didn't really understand the differences between detective work and spy work. And there's some critical ones, especially around timing, information flow. Also, not over exaggerating true sizes. He didn't really. So he was an excellent detective. That would be the spy, and he did it right away. Yeah, that would be the. But if the other guys not the way we really got it. So one of the at the top, which Pinkerton brought with him, was a gentleman named Timothy Webster. I won't talk too much about him. I would just say he did serve in multiple covert operations in the South. He actually effectively was the double agent because he was pretending to carry messages from Confederates who he had been friends with and bring them north, and in fact, they were reading, copying all those letters and writing them to Pinkerton and to McLeod. So Webster was basically on the page. He also had one line. Trains I won't get into it. That was the logic assassinated would get on his way to Washington. Webster was his dream on the fight. There's no issue about that. This is Price Lewis. There's another one, 12. I'm sorry, Pinkerton's operatives. He also did with examination report. And I really just like to look at the picture of one of those. And it's not bad. The whole thing is awesome. So one of the really interesting things about Pinkerton, you may know already, is that he wasn't afraid to use it. The first years, women operatives, he was detective agents, again, involved for the war. And once the war broke out, he realized that he could also gather information from slaves who were still across the regions. And this was innovative at the time, but it's actually, again, very similar to what we see today, where you have a line and refugees are coming across. They'll be interviewed by the intelligence folks on the other side of the line because they were just hours or days before exactly where you want to get information from, right? They were on the other side of the line. They know where troops were. They know who's positioned where. So Pinkerton was interviewing those escaped slaves as they were coming across the line. One of them was the gentleman depicted here, and also one of the cover of the book down in the corner, a guy named John Scoville. And Scoville had brought north with his master from Mississippi prior or at the outset of the war. He was in Virginia, escaped, made his way to Washington, D.C., was interviewed by Pinkerton, made such an impression on Pinkerton that rather than just gathering that information and what he had seen, he actually recruited him to become an active intelligence agent for the Federal Army, and he became then part of Pinkerton's operatives and went back into the Confederacy on at least 2 undercover missions. So this is the second CIA document that I mentioned earlier. Hope you're not wiretapped here. But what they talk specifically, the title of the article is called Black Dispatches. That was the term that they used for these escaped slaves coming across the lines that I mentioned. What the article had to say about Scoville was that he was credited with providing valuable intelligence on Confederate river battle, status of supplies, troop morale, and goods. Frequently, while white Pinkerton agents were getting information from Confederate officials and officers, Scoville would seek out the local leaders in the Black community and gather information on local conditions, fortifications, and troop distancing. And this, the quote on the right here isn't specifically about Scoville, but I liked it so much that I included it here, and I also put it at the beginning of the book. And it's not just reading off here. Frederick Douglass said, "The true history of this war will show that the Royal Army found no friends at the South so faithful, active, and daring in their efforts to sustain the government as the Negroes. Negroes have repeatedly threaded their way through the lines of the rebels, exposing themselves to bullets to convey important information to the Royal Army at the time." And that resonated with me so much that I just love doing it. Now, what's interesting is that observation was verified by another guy with a slightly different take on it. A guy you might have heard of named Robert Hilliard. And his comment was, "There is no greater source of information to our enemy than our Negroes." So again, same observation, a little different opinion on whether it's good or bad from him. But it's clear that was an important pipeline of information coming from the South to. So just to talk for a minute here about Mr. Scoville. There were multiple articles written about him over the years. Every now and then he seems to kind of bubble up to the surface. This one was from, Foster from, 1963, issue of Ebony magazine. There was an article about Skull on that. Some of you might remember these things. These were called Pantherizing cards. They started coming out around bicentennial in 1776. This was actually produced in 1979, I think. But they were kind of just highlighting different aspects of American history. And on the front, they had a picture like this, and on the back, they would have some text that described them. So this one is actually specifically about John Scoville. But all of them trace back to the book in the middle there, and that's called The Spy of the Rebellion, and it's written by my friend Tom Pinkerton, who I really, really hope to never have to read. He's a blowhard, desperately needs an editor, huge self-promoter, and he's also the sole source of information that we know about John Scoville. I want to clarify that a bit by saying we're talking about a person who was born in slavery, so of course we know where everything there. He grew up, escaped, became a spy. Well, they're spy, you don't want to record during that time. And then the book here, The Spy of the Rebellion, was written 20 years after the Civil War in 1883 was published. And Pinkerton had a habit of changing people's names. Those that hadn't been for one reason or another become known over the years, he used pseudonyms in the book, not just for Scoville, but for everything. So very likely that, again, we're talking about somebody who was born in slavery, became a spy, and probably his own biographer changed his name. So when people say, well, why don't we know anything else about John Scoville? Those are the three things. We will full disclosure here, there are some historians who think that I would discount that. As I said earlier, I'm not a historian, I'm not sitting here to give definitive answers. There's also at least one other historian who has posited that maybe he was an aggregate of several different people that they could do using, to gather intelligence. We kind of blend them all together into John Scoville. We'll say this, by far, rigorous research and performance of not only contemporary but modern historians tend to believe that Scoville was a real person, and they almost believe everything that they wrote about it. Frankly, so it's pretty seemed fairly fabricated, but that he was very much a real person, very much did actively spy. And like I said, that is really the general consensus of most historians. So I'll give you, is that including you in that here?
You got 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll give you a quick story here. When I read this book, when I read the articles I mentioned earlier, that's when I first got my about Scoville. And it made such an impression on me that I'm like, this guy, I think this will be pretty cool at the end for a while. Nobody ever heard of him. And so we're driving home from a Christmas party tonight, my son and I, and we were kind of joking around and things. And I said, yeah, I think we read this book about this guy, John Scoville, and the right thing to do is what I really do this. And Jake interrupted me. He was a teenager at the time. He interrupted me in the middle of that, and he goes, Dad, you have to write this book. And I said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. I didn't know what he was talking about. Yeah, of course, yeah, that's what we're talking about. And he goes, no. He goes, you have to write this book. You have to tell Scoville's story. He said, the guy was an American hero. And 150 plus years later, people forgot who he is. He said, you need to put him back to people's view. And part of the really stuff that Jake said was that you need to give him his place. And so that was really kind of a driving force for me. Somebody that was 95 people earlier, it's kind of really, usually got embarrassed to say, oh, it was 7 years. I wasn't writing the whole time. It's like this. But when I got tough spots where it was like that, it's still worth it. I thought back to what Jake said, and to what I knew about school. I said, you know, if I don't do this, if I don't keep pushing, it's not going to get me. And it might be like 20 years, 40 years. I would somebody else comes along and this is a story and tries to tell. So that's really what, you know, what I can drive through. So all that said, you today with a bit of a mystery, bit of a riddle. I mentioned that some people think it's going may not be real. Most people think he is. There's a picture. The Baker's camp, and this is a big organization campaign. In 1862, spring 1862, and it's more of a season on the side here, but this is North Bagn's secretary. These other people have all been identified as various operatives sitting on the table, except for this fellow right here. As far as I know, there's some digging on this. I don't believe anybody has ever been like exactly what it is. So the question is that John Stoll? Is that why they took a picture of him sitting at the table facing the camera? It's obviously not serving what they can because he's eating with everybody else at the table, right? It's again, it's another unanswerable question that we I shouldn't say we will never know the answer to that, because with what they're doing with digital research on photos and things today, it's kind of mind blowing. So maybe some AI, something in the future might be able to help answer that question. But for right now, that may very well be the old photograph of the guy that we know that John spoke. Well, thank you today. Appreciate everybody in here. The question, do you want to start with any questions on that?
We don't have any from Zoom right now.
Okay. So I'm happy to. We'll go ladies first. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Back to the spies flying over the telegraph poles to, get the messages. How they know? Do you know how they knew when a message was coming through? Or did they just like have people hanging out there for hours or what?
It was. I know part of it. I was hoping you were going to probably participate in that. I know.
Okay.
Electrical. So thank you for not asking that question. So what they do during the battle, there were almost constant. So if you could get to a place where you could do that without being seen, and flying, of course, that's the key, right? You can't just go flying the lines of time over and see it and tap it. You got to get to some place that goes out of the way. And they were flying and check, and of course, there's nothing coming through. Just go. There's a book. A book called Campaigning with Great. I might be 2 years. It's been about 2 years since I've read. I'm pretty sure there's a piece in there that talks specifically about having rep wires in the application side. But it's important in that area. So it's not just about Washington.
These people get paid, or was it all, I mean, I guess there were some amateurs, some professionals, so they get paid.
Yes, you answered your own question, you'll get a little bit more detail. So some of them, like, what was the name? They were just doing it, so they weren't paid for it. I'm gonna say maybe, I could be wrong, so I'm gonna say maybe after the war that they did receive a pension. in recognition of what they have done, but again, it might not be quite right. But Pinkerton's operative, yes, they received a regular salary. It was on the order of like, $10 a month. It's not testing. But it was a regular. It's a bit more on the soldier side. Any other questions? Did you put everybody?
Were there any soldiers that were spied, and were they caught, spies, and were they caught?
Yes to both. So there's during the Civil War, this is, I can give you the whole lecture on this, for out and treat it one time. They didn't always make the distinction between spies and scouts. But I mean, generally, scouts were more typically soldiers who go across things, so they want to act like a lot of times put on the Confederate uniform for the federal or vice versa. And just go into what we need. Then it got recognition there, and once it got dark, it was paid off and go back there. And several, I've been the art of the trades and but that's using his biggest concern was always getting back into that shop. Because once you're out, they don't know, you're undercover, right? You're fine. They don't know that you are a spy trying to come back in and keep the mechanism. They loosely use passwords and things like that, but in the day, if you run in a day or two, password will change and you can know it. Yes, sir.
You know, it's interesting when you first started about that woman and she couldn't read or anything, but writing their white office. And she thought it's interesting because there's 2 volumes now, the same word right from John Jones. In the path that you report, and I'm just wondering, she was one response because he always suspected Secretary of State Benjamin of being the spy when all along. If we should make, if you start things together, that it must have been her who he never suspected that gave all that, because he talks in his book about how he suspected Benjamin was a traitor. Then he always sort of kept his eye on him, but he reported everything that went on during the Civil War. As a clerk in Jefferson's day, not knowing that it was probably that important.
It could have easily been very obvious, right? Yeah. And so you bring up a couple of interesting points there that I kind of skimmed over and I went back to the attitudes of the time, right? So people thought, first of all, that women were the weaker sex, not just physically, but mentally. And they wouldn't have the capacity to act as spies, that they wouldn't be able to, even if they heard something, they wouldn't be able to understand it. Right? Absolutely. That long list of female spies that I put up there shows how clearly that wasn't true. You take that a step further and look at the black population at the time. It's crazy to me. Yet it's true. I read in multiple places that in that time, let's say in a Confederate household or in a Confederate white household, they would have a top secret conversation directly in front of their slaves 5 feet away and not think a single thing of it, not even consider remotely that that person could hear and make use of that information. Now, the reason, of course, they thought that is because A, they would consider it to be a person in the first place, which is tragic but factual. B, there are some people, even if they somehow understand a piece of it, can make sense of it, or they elsewhere. And so, like for Mary Bowser, it's double, right, because she was a black woman. And then just quickly on the subject of Jude Benjamin, I was positive on this, I think he was Jewish. And that was one of the reasons to get at, because at the time, he wasn't totally trusted by the members of the Confederate cabinet. That's pretty much, none of those accusations were ever, they weren't true. The information was, one just quick, one quick thing, story about, she was gathering information, she would bring it back to the middle of the house, and they would write it down again in fashion, put it on a tiny piece of silver, and they would take eggs, and they would punch holes in them, and drain milk out of the egg, and then slip that tiny message inside there and put it in a basket, maybe one egg in, basket of 40 or whatever. And then that is one of the methods that they can use to get information out of Richmond and to their contacts and get it to the world. So I just, thank you for giving me the chance to tell that story, and I love that.
Pause.
But we'll do jump in here.
In World War II, the United States broke the Japanese code. That was instrumental to the battlefield by instrumental with Germany and we have the land. Was there a significant event, any cyber significant event in the Civil War that occurred because of information that was by either side?
I can tell you that and I can't give you the specifics off the top of my head, I apologize, but
That's what
and then, and I shouldn't know this because it's in my book, but in one of the very early, spring of 1861, when I was in Western Virginia, I just got a lawyer from town. What happened was the colonel of the Confederacy, that's the George Adams brand. And they were prices of those he gathered information, which he had to go back and flow, and they were able to Confederate forces and get it away. It's down in the common. Those are just the problem. So yes,
I just want to mention again, the thing that you said about how women were never fought, Peggy Morris Stewart, she was a wife of an arms leader. Her husband knew how brilliant she was, but German officers to that, because she was so beautiful, had her sitting in the secret. She heard all the plans for the extermination of Jews and everything. Then after the meetings were over, her husband locked her in a room. She escaped. And she developed what now is Wi-Fi. Right. And she submitted to the department in 1942 because she wanted them to be, because the torpedoes were hardwired. And she came up with a system which, as I said, is Wi-Fi now. Here couldn't be broken, you could be controlled radioactive, radio device. That put the Navy buried in it because they didn't respect her. It wasn't until the Cuban Missile Crisis when Kennedy brought it out and they developed it for the Navy.
and I don't know, I know that story, I didn't know the general overtone of it. I didn't know the part about her being locked in her room. But the irony was that she said she was almost certainly the smartest person in that. She was the smartest person in that. The woman was an absolute genius. But yeah, it's again just attitudes of the time, right? And not that all those attitudes have gone away today.
Exactly.
But it's certainly, that was 70, 80 years ago. You're talking about, we're back to 60 years ago. those many times. But thankfully, use that totally to their advantage, played that up. But women did that, the African Americans did that, totally played that up, and then got that information.
All right, everyone, well, let's give Rob a hand for. Rob does have copies of his book for sale back here. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any other questions anyone has. Otherwise, we'll see you back on the third Saturday in October, the 19th. If anyone's interested in symposium tickets, we can do them here, check or cash or credit card. They're on our website now. Challenge anybody to find that lineup for less price. So come out to the symposium. Thank you for all for coming out today, and we'll see you next month.